To kind of set the table and set the stage, if you will, we'll jump through some of these market insights from a macro level just to kind of get us tuned in again to where we are on several fronts for the industry. And so with that, I think it's always real easy to start with the weather, right? That's just kind of a pretty obvious spot because this is really one of the key components of what drives our business, particularly as we're running cattle out on pasture and with regard to our feed resources. And it's really encouraging to see the most updated drought map there on the left. I think it's pretty easy to understand that those white areas show some definite moisture repair and some conditions that are much more conducive across much of the center part and western part of the country in the last 12 months, particularly as compared to December a year ago. At the same time and in the same breath, I think many of you will also put an asterisk next to that and say, yes, but in my neck of the woods this, or in my neck of the woods that. Yes, we've got some moisture today, but my feed resources aren't what they really could be, and that kind of thing. And I'm totally tuned into that concept. But in general, with regard to these larger trends and macro functions of our marketplace, we have some outlook here for grazing conditions and probably some feed resources today that are sure better and improved over a year ago and much, much better than 2 years ago, depending on your zip code. But the major cow states, I think, generally improved. However, the current situation with our beef cow numbers in this country is reflective of more challenging years in the recent rearview mirror. Am I right? As well, when you look back to 2014, we see what some folks want to talk about as a 10-year cattle cycle and a price impact to our beef cow numbers. But I think many of you will also quickly agree that that's more of an historical fact and impact to our business than what we're looking at here in this particular chart. And of course, in the last 10, 12 years, absolutely the case that the weather has driven beef cow numbers, not simply the economics of supply and demand from a beef and a cattle cycle perspective. So the weather has driven us to where we are today. And these projections into 24 through 26 show that with these cow numbers projected to be down pretty significantly here in the January 30th report, the projections are for that to continue to be the case in 2025 and finally in 26 to start to build the cow herd. But observations, I think, in the country today would suggest that that won't be a rapid and hand-over-fist improvement, even if moisture conditions are improved in many parts of the country due to some economic conditions, and the number one of those being interest rates. So moving along to a little bit of the seasonal changes we see, many of you have participated in this trend, which is bringing cull cows to town this fall, particularly those that are in those spring calving areas. And discussion just prior to this, our session here today with some folks really emphasized the fact that we have seen a larger open and cull cow rate in 2023 across many parts of the country than we certainly would expect to on an annual, normal annual basis. As a result here this fall, even though the cull cow rate has been 11% smaller than a year ago, the trend this fall has been for a resurgence in cull cows coming to town. And part of that, of course, is due to high prices. And we can all respond to those economic signals. And the good news is, when those of us that did have a cow to take to the auction, and perhaps she goes on to become hamburger, the price and the return on those cows has been very, very helpful to the bottom line. And as a result, any cow with a blemish, or perhaps she's outstayed her welcome, has had a ride to town a little bit more readily here in the last couple of years, as we've had 2 years in a row of 21% increases in that cull cow price. Then moving along to supply here, a little bit closer to home in terms of the fed cattle scenario and the world that I tend to live in week to week, which is certified Angus beef and this fed cattle market. We've seen similar impacts, of course, come through in these recent calf crops. And in 23, we just closed the books on a year that'll be down 3.2% for fed cattle weekly marketings. And that's a pretty significant change from the year prior, and a year that was a decline that will be followed by a couple more here in the near future. So the outlook in terms of fed cattle price and the leverage has certainly shifted from the packer to the feeding sector, right? And we've certainly experienced this here in 2023 as this market has responded. I want to jump quickly to carcass weights, and we'll come back to price momentarily. Another trend that I think is really impactful and has actually underpinned a bit of our beef supply and certainly been a help to the certified Angus beef brand in terms of supplying our end user partners with product is the increase in carcass weights. And for this particular discussion with regard to balancing the cow and the consumer, this item alone is hugely important, right? Because we have a scale with regard to the right size cow and the right size carcass that don't often agree, particularly today. We are now posting all-time record high fed steer carcass weights in the most current week's data at 941 pounds on average. And a friend pointed out to me earlier that the average doesn't account for the heaviest ones in terms of what our optics see. So what do the heaviest ones weigh? We've got some exceptionally heavy carcasses out there. Now that's good from the standpoint of beef supply. Certainly helps in terms of end product pricing as we have fewer total animals to slaughter weekly, but we do keep tonnage underpinned at least a bit based on carcass weight. However, from a cow perspective, in a ranch function standpoint, we can argue against this necessarily always being a good thing, can't we? So there's where we've got to get back to some balance in our conversation. I think my panelists will have something to say about there here in a little bit. Jump back to fed steer price and that leverage. In 2023, the average for the year has been an increase of 21% or a little bit more in terms of the weekly fed steer price. In general, this has been a tremendous change of leverage shift from the packer to the feeding segment. But back out here in the fourth quarter of the year, you can see leverage shifted back just a bit more again to the packer, didn't it? A lot of this came through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and some very significant downgrades in those futures months prices looking ahead. Was that all fundamental? It certainly was not. A lot of that was driven on investors and those outside funds and the impacts they had on futures. Unfortunately, that does land back to us on the cash market, and we saw that happen again. Does that mean that's going to carry forward? I think the last few days would argue against it. I think we're back in a spot here. Yes, we've ratcheted much lower than anybody wanted to see. However, I think the trajectory ahead looks very positive based on demand and supply fundamentals. What's it going to look like, in terms of cost of gain moving forward and our ability to take advantage of that market? I'm not going to get into a feed cost conversation with the time we have, but I think you'd agree by this chart, which is your corn futures for March 24, the outlook's pretty good in terms of efficiently producing beef in the near future. Back to the ranch level then, I really like CattleFax's depiction of the summer video sale prices and the annual trend change there. I think everybody in the room would be excited to see what we've done here in 2023 with a 36% increase in those summer sales. Now, did that happen every week of the month in the fall of the year when the fall runs were going on? Certainly not. But this is a good bellwether for the trends, and I think obviously helped to pay some bills and pay down some debt for the past year. Then there's the final piece of the year, pretty strong all in all, that blue line being 23. Yes, a little bit lower towards the end of the year, but seasonally lower and expected with regard to the season of the year. Okay, I want to quickly get into the cutout side and the consumer side so that we can get on again to that meat and potatoes piece that I'm looking forward to. So let's get over here onto the carcass cutout side and kind of where we live at Certified Angus Beef in the part of the business that we're trying to drive for you folks in the Angus business. As we look at cutout values over the past few years, these bars don't look tremendously different, but from 2016 till this past year, we've seen a 43% increase in the wholesale cutout value, in this case for the choice cutout. I'd argue that that's a really significant difference to those folks that are end users and partners downstream. So I think that provides some headwinds with regard, I think, as you can imagine, in terms of demand. So what are we offering the consumer? How have we evolved in the beef business? Many of you are very in tune to these trends and have seen this stuff before. But for those maybe that don't live in these numbers every day, I want you to focus really hard on this particular slide going back to 2006 and these trends in the quality of carcasses that we as American beef producers are offering to the consumer. These are nationwide average numbers, and the Certified Angus Beef trend is in there as well, moving up from 5.9% of the total fed cattle supply in terms of end product to today, over 21% of all steer and heifer product qualifies for Certified Angus Beef. Just as importantly, look at that select trend line. We have removed the select grade as a significant portion of our beef cattle, our beef carcass market in the modern era. From a price perspective, even though those changes and shifts have occurred, and it's been a monumental 15, 17-year period in our business, we continue to add value in a price per pound that we can chase as a producer. And when I say chase it, I don't mean momentarily, I mean follow the trend in terms of what's building beef demand, and that's a high-quality eating experience. The most basic bellwether of those, of course, being the Choice Select spread. This data would certainly suggest that in 23, the trend was strong, and stronger than the previous 5-year period. Well, now as we compare the Certified Angus Beef brand to the Choice line, which is 0 in this chart, to Select, which is the red zone below, it's real easy to see that since 2008, even though we've continued to build supply, we continue also to build a price gap between these quality grades, as well with the Certified Angus Beef brand on top. Folks, that's a trend that we can get excited about in the Angus business. Now, from a feed yard perspective, we're talking about dollars per head, right? I don't care about the cutout as much. Show me the money on my closeout. And this is the trend that we're really excited about at Certified Angus Beef in terms of what the return is over the weekly cash average market. Folks, I can't break it down for you any more simplistically than this in terms of what has Certified Angus Beef done for the Angus breed, and really collectively, you could say for the entire beef business in terms of driving dollars back through the system. And when feed yards are looking at this trend over time, it's certainly easy to agree that that has been happening quite well. About to finish up, but I want to share what's most recently a trend that I'm pretty excited about, and we all are at CAB. And this is the fact that it's not just your middle meats, folks, that are driving value. You know, we just came through the holiday season through December, and what happens to those ribeyes and tenderloins? They're a forgotten memory. They're old news. The price was here, and the price comes down. And that's what we're seeing in the weekly data, as expected seasonally. Well, we've got a whole carcass to sell, okay? So the Certified Angus Beef brand, to brag just a little about what we're getting done, with regard to the brand and those high-quality cattle, we're adding value to both ends of the carcasses as well. Not only adding a little, but increasingly adding value annually in the last handful of years. You can see that those chuck and round values continue to outpace Choice and Select as we move up with marbling. So those end meats are now more valuable and receiving a premium as compared to even as recently as 2018. I haven't said much about prime, have I? Some of you are sitting up here saying, I'm concerned about my prime percentage, not your CAB and Choice. Hey, good for you. I want you to be there. I mean, that's the goal, isn't it, after all, and the most value that's brought to the table. But the fact of the matter is that most of us, if we're looking at the average, are only playing around with 9 to 12% prime on average for all of our cattle. For those of you that are hitting 50% and better, congratulations. I can see you're a goal-oriented individual in your cattle operation, and rightly so. And here's why. The prime premium is represented here in the blue bars. Now, it's not a straight linear over time, is it? It was impacted through COVID. It was impacted through supply issues in 2020 and 21. But the red line is your carcass production volume coupled with that price. What have we done since 2009? We have increased the prime product more than 3-4 times in terms of volume on an annual basis through this period. We have collectively, as a beef producing public, engaged in that goal of prime, and you breeders sitting up here that have included some of these better genetics for that purpose, you've been successful in driving this across the country. It's worth doing when the supply grows and the premiums grow right along with it. Finally, as we move on to the next segment, Ron, get ready. I want to give you my most complicated and favorite slide of the day. I don't expect you to memorize what this is, but let me describe it for you, and that is, this is almost 2 million head of carcasses that were Angus type, or more simply stated, black-hided, certified Angus beef eligible carcasses in 2002 from a multitude of our licensed packers. Okay, marbling score distribution for each of those carcasses, almost 2 million. So you can see the red arrow in the center is important. That's the line moving left to right where we switch from low choice to premium choice. What do you see in the center? That's a pretty sharp bell-shaped curve, isn't it? And a lot of carcasses just left of center. Well, today, left of center is a difference of $25 to $30 a hundredweight. Okay? $45 with regard to certified Angus beef. What I should have said is low choice is 25 to 30. Moving up to certified Angus beef is we're moving up to 45. Okay? So there are 10% of these Angus type carcasses that are 30 marbling points away from moving into premium choice. So what's the point? We're here to talk about balancing the cow and the consumer. And my to you and my suggestion is we can easily balance the cow and the consumer demand, which is a profit-driven target for us, by just shoving some of these carcasses over into premium choice and into the certified Angus beef brand. A slight nudge does not require elite selection for carcass traits, specifically marbling, does it? It requires just a bit more focus and selection for cattle that are above average in order to get that done.
I'm Ron Hays. I'm a senior farm broadcaster for the Radio Oklahoma Ag Network and Oklahoma Farm Report. If you're in the state of Oklahoma or one of our neighboring states, perhaps you've heard our reports down through the years or read our email. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you for just a few minutes to talk about the idea of trying to balance maternal versus terminal, or as we say, the cow versus the consumer, or the cow trying to be in harmony with the consumer. I've got three outstanding gentlemen. You've already heard from Paul. Paul, just a way of introducing him just a little bit more, is currently the Director of Supply Management and Analysis for Certified Angus Beef. He works regularly trying to build relationships with cattle feeders, commercial cow-calf producers, and registered breeders, pointing to ways to properly manage and market high-quality cattle. Before CAB, he was the feedlot manager for the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, so he's got a world of experience in the cattle business for sure. Next to him, we've got Jesse Lucky. Jesse is from northwestern Oklahoma, general manager of the Snake Creek Cattle Company in Buffalo, Oklahoma, just right almost on the state line with Kansas. They have about 17,000 acres. The ranch has long been a diverse cow-calf operation using Angus genetics. Lucky was attendant. Jesse attended Kansas State University and had a great career off ranch for a few years, but went back in 2010 along with his wife Amanda and daughter Addison. Since that time, Their focus has been to reinvest into the ranch, develop a sustainable succession strategy, and forge synergistic industry relationships, ensuring that Snake Creek can be around for generations to come. Great, great cow-calf operation. And finally, my friend Dr. Mark Johnson is here. You may have seen him in the ring here a little bit earlier with the OSU Pen of Bulls. And he's a professor of animal and food sciences at OSU in Stillwater. Been there since 1992. He has held the Totusek Endowed Chair, served as supervisor of the OSU Purebred Beef Cattle Center, conducted youth and beef cattle extension programming, coached the Livestock Judging Team, had a great run there for about 7 teams that won the American Royal, 4 national championship teams, and has judged cattle shows all across the United States. He also has his own cattle operation near Orlando, Oklahoma, just outside of Stillwater. He and his family operate J&J Beef Genetics, LLC. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. And let's jump into this idea. One thing I wanted to kind of bring out, first of all, we are in a great time as far as being able to produce and give the consumer a great eating experience. I can remember talking to cattle producers and beef industry experts back in the 70s and 80s, early 90s. We were worried that a consumer would go to the grocery store and buy a steak or another piece of beef, and they'd have an awful experience. It was tough. It was bad. It turned them off. But yet we were able to make some changes. Certified Angus beef most certainly has done a part of that as well. But today we have the opportunity to give them a great eating experience almost every single time. And given that idea, how do we balance this juggling act of making sure we've got a great maternal cow that can produce that calf, raise that calf, give us a calf that can produce a lot of pounds and be very efficient along the way? How do we balance that end of it with the end of making sure the carcass characteristics are right that Paul was just talking about with CAB? Mark, why don't we start with you? How do we balance cow and the consumer?
Well, I believe it's always important that we do that, and how we go about it, it depends a great deal on our specific operation, where we are running cows. One of the unique things about this country is that we have a lot of different production environments. And beef production is unique from the other competing proteins in that sense, that we have hot, humid climates, cold, arid climates, and all things in between as far as soil types and annual rainfall and those type of production challenges, if you will, that we deal with as beef producers in the cow-calf sector. It's a great success story that we have made so much improvement in carcass quality and consistency really in the past 30 years, and particularly even more accelerated in the past 10 to 15 years. But I always share this. It's when we think of the ideal beef animal in North America, it's a balance, like a set of scales. On one side, you have the cow, the production factory, that has to fit her production environment. She's got to be able to get enough nutritional resources within that production environment that she weans off a calf each 12 months. And then that other side of the scale is, are we meeting consumer demands in our product for what they want? It is of interest to me that as we are here this morning in a forum of a lot of purebred Seedstock Angus breeders, that there are multiple sub-consumers along the way. That at my house, a consumer of our product, the cattle that we've bred and marketed in the past 10 years, has been our own children showing those heifers. That was an important consumer demand to meet, as well as your commercial bull buyer, and then their respective marketing endpoints. Someone that buys a bull from you, yes, we ultimately keep the consumer in mind out here of beef, the product, but there is the reality that they may sell weaned calves. They may retain ownership and sell those calves as yearlings, as likely as they are to retain them all the way through finishing. And so it's a balancing act, and then there's even a wider range of consumers that we've got to meet the demand of along the way. But I've probably spoken too long here. I guess my concluding thought to this first question is we cannot lose sight of a cow that fits and functions in her production environment.
Okay, let's morph over to Jesse. Jesse, you've got a lot of mama cows that you're trying to keep alive and healthy there on the high plains. What's the secrets?
I guess I want to echo what he just said about having a cow that fits your environment, your production environment. But a lot of times I think what we do is we concentrate on EPDs and genetics and not highly heritable traits that as a management tool. And I don't think there's any substitution for good management for your cow herd. And an open cow is the most expensive animal you have on the place. And to shorten your calving windows getting those cold cows out of your herd, it's a natural selection for those maternal traits. One thing from a genetic standpoint we always look at is calving ease, and then the next thing right after that is we have to have a docile animal, and then after that we're highly concentrated on carcass traits after that. So at the end of the day, we can't forget about the consumer and that eating experience. I think you look back to the 90s and previous to that was a difficult time for the beef industry, and we've come a long way since then. But at the end of the day, what we do, and we're an operation that retains ownership of 100% of our calves that come off of a ranch. So we get carcass data back on those animals, that report card that tells us what kind of job we're doing. We've always been of the mentality you can't starve a profit into your cow. And then we take that data and then we start making choices based on what we're seeing from that carcass data. At the same time, managing that cow herd appropriately. So I guess I'm very adamant about keeping that consumer in mind and letting those laws of supply and demand take care of themselves.
Paul, your thoughts on the consumer and trying to balance it with that mama cow?
Well, I think it's a fun time to be asking that question of ourselves, and the reason is this: we can select genetics today with the cow as a primary concern at the ranch level and not have to necessarily sacrifice other traits. And that's what's fun about where we are, particularly with the Angus breed. I mean, we're in the envious position with Angus cattle that we can do so many things so well with that cow and that genetic package. So we can select for those convenience traits that I would call requirements at the ranch and still make certain that we're meeting some thresholds, whether it be for ribeye size, whether it be for marbling, but keeping everything in mind and keeping that balance there. So as I live day to day on the end of the business that's specific to the consumer and cut out value differences and fed cattle values, I see the rancher's opportunity to grab a hold and add value today greater than it's been at any time in the past, because the genetics that offer that balance are so widely available, whereas at one time perhaps sacrifices were more of a commonality in selecting genetics.
I know that one of the things we hear so many folks talk about when you start talking about considerations for the mama cow, for the beef cow, the size of the cow matters. That moderation, a moderate cow a lot of times can be a lot more efficient for today's modern beef herd. What your thoughts, guys, about that?
That is an interesting one and a really neat question, because in this stage that we've been going through the last few years, as we hear about 16 and 1,700 pound finished weight pens of calves coming out of feed yards, it leads back to the question, well, how big do the cows need to be to produce those? And I think the answer to that, it's the size of cows that we have on hand right now. We've made the cows big enough to generate the genetics to produce finished calves at 1,700 pounds. I do think at the phase we're at here at the onset of 2024, that it is a very appropriate time in that whole set of checks and balances in this industry to take inventory of our mature cow weights because of what I just said, and think about how we can go about improving efficiencies and maybe having a cow that at this mature weight, she weans off a little higher percentage of that mature weight, or particularly on a herd-wide basis, that we are seeing our cow herds wean off a higher percentage of pounds relative to their mature weight. And the nice thing is we have a lot of selection tools right now at our disposal that can be used to tweak some of these traits to pull us more in line with doing that. It's nice as well that a trait like marbling is related favorably genetically to a lot of these cow productivity traits. And so we don't have to necessarily pick one versus the other.
Jesse, along those lines, what's a cow look like on your place that is going to help you succeed and make a profit?
The one thing that I go back to time and time again is can that cow go and can she have a calf and reproduce and get bred again the next year, year after year after year? And I think that's a telltale sign of having the right size cow for your environment. I think the biggest limitation on animal size that we're going to see is probably what the restrictions the packers are going to put on us on these heavyweight carcasses. So if we're getting penalized for heavyweight carcasses because we're sending a 1,100 pound carcass to the packer consistently, I think that's going to be a problem. And so do those plants need retooled? And from a commercial cow-calf producer, that's pretty much out of our control. Having said that, I think that now I go back to the thing where we concentrate on highly heritable traits, and then the natural selection side of things plays the most important role in our cow size. But to say that, I would also say the average producer probably underestimates how big their cows really are. I think there's a lot of people that think they have 1,200 pound cows and they really have 1,350 or 1,400 pound cows.
Well, I think these two said most of it, but I just follow up with, I guess, what I advocate, Ron, and that is that the cow size should be driven by the rancher's decision in terms of what functions best for him, and recognizing that there's half of the cattle that are below average out there for growth and mature size. If a person chooses to run a cow that's moderate, the offspring of those cattle can still achieve some exceptionally heavy weights in the feed yard. And a lot of that's driven on feed yard management as well. So I don't think it's necessarily the cow-calf operator's responsibility in total to raise a calf that'll be 1,700 pounds live weight at finish. The feed yard's decision to take a calf to that weight is really their profit opportunity or their economic choice. And I think ranchers in general should probably lean more to the middle of the road if it suits their management system, rather than feeling a motivator that's driven by demand for cattle that are exceptional in size, because we've proven an ability to continue to push that envelope without singularly selecting for that.
One of the things I think we've had to learn as cattle producers over the years, and this is something I heard, and it really was a revolutionary idea back when I heard it for the first time. I think it was early 80s. A feedlot legend in our part of the world, a guy named Lad Hitch, talked about being a beef producer. And he wasn't just a cattleman. And that's part of this whole idea of trying to balance, isn't it? I mean, when we start talking about not just paying attention to the cows, but also trying to pay attention to that housewife or that consumer having a good eating experience. How does that play, Jesse, into your I guess decision-making strategic plan for your ranch, or does it?
One thing that we focus on is that added value, and that added value that we do in creating a sustainable product and a premium product. You know, when we see those premiums coming back from the packer, that's a built-in hedge, inherently a built-in hedge for our operation. And we tend to look at the long-term game as far as what the consumer wants and what kind of beef we're producing, and the carcass data as a report card. And those premiums vary from year to year. There's more premiums built in some years than others, but at the same time, that's the built-in hedge for our operation. You know, we recently put in a backgrounding yard and a heifer development facility. They're one and the same, but that was that risk mitigation, because we looked at the slide about the drought monitor. You know, that was a way to maintain our cow herd and consistently keep our goals consistent going year to year without reducing our cow herd and building our cow herd, and letting the weather and other factors, variables, dictate to us what we were going to do instead of us dictating what we were going to do. So that's one of the things that I think we need to play in more sectors of the beef industry to really understand what we need to be doing to serve the consumer.
I think it's critical that we never lose sight of Lad Hitch's comment that we are beef producers. And, you know, the beef industry in this country is a great success story because we have this sustainable resource of the forage we can grow that a beef cow can turn into a nutrient-dense, highly digestible thing for humans to consume. The cows are the intermediary. And it's a great business. It's a fascinating business. It's as dynamic and complex a business as we think of the beef industry as any that exists. And yet it gets back to that fundamental thing. It wouldn't exist if people did not want to consume beef, the product.
Paul, one thing that I know that, you know, in your role, you're working with folks and trying to help them maximize their herd when it comes to CAB, hit those targets, those 10 specifications that CAB is very famous for. And with keeping that in mind, for a producer, how do they do that successfully time and time again, but make sure that they keep that cow where she's a productive part of the ranch?
Well, I wish it were a more complicated equation. Maybe I could sell it, but it's too simple to sell it, and it's just a matter of disciplined selection. And again, it doesn't have to be a selection of elite genetics that will leave us wanting for something or sacrificing something. Just a matter of take care of the basics that are required for your ranch. Select sires that do the things you cannot sacrifice, and then look over at the marbling column and make sure that there's enough of that to keep us above average and moving in the right direction. Now, to be maybe a little less tongue-in-cheek, Ron, I would say maybe select a bull that's in the top 25% of the breed. In terms of marbling, that makes a little more sense to me, but the point simply being that keep everything above a threshold that maybe, if necessary, seek some help in setting those thresholds from others. But it's really a very simple equation as long as we remain disciplined in that way.
I guess one last question to all three of you. What is the future? In other words, how do we do a better job of making sure we keep that consumer happy and making sure that as beef producers, not just cattle producers, we're able to do that? What's the game plan going forward to make sure that consumer stays willing to pay a premium for a quality product?
I'll take my opportunity with the mic first, Ron. First of all, I think we're doing a pretty good job of it as an industry today in terms of informing the consumer better than we have ever before. The opportunities are endless in that regard. We all know that consumer behavior does not lend to folks spending a lot of time learning about products. They want to have a brand name specifically that they can trust and believe in. So I think we're doing that okay at Certified Angus Beef, and really proud of my predecessors and colleagues for building that system. But I think more of a directive to the production sector is this. We've got a majority of folks out there, serious cattlemen, whether they be part-time or full-time, that are informed about the right things to do in many, many ways, including genetic selection, including consumer satisfaction through a higher quality product. But the fact of the matter is we have an awful lot of folks that are not tuned in the production sector to some of these messages. Maybe they're not driven financially to learn more. It's just not a priority in their life, and the cattle are a byproduct of land ownership, etc. So we've got to continue to educate those folks, and that seems like, you know, such an overdone statement. We've got to educate. But I do believe that that's a big piece of making the whole of our U.S. production that much better.
One thing, and the strides we've made in the last 20 years has been amazing, number one. But the thing that I think is most important for us as an industry is to quit working in individual segments within the industry. We need to start communicating from the cow-calf sector to the stocker sector to the feeder, and getting that information translated across all sectors. I think we gain efficiencies by doing that. I think if we can get people to realize that end product is the number one goal instead of what that animal brings at the sale barn, I think that that changes the dynamics and unifies the goals of the beef industry.
I would agree with those points and only add that, you know, improving genetic potential and providing the management that facilitates a satisfying eating experience, and the things that we've accomplished through BQA, more producer certification, that has eliminated some of those negative experiences that people may have had once upon a time from an injection site blemish and things of that nature.
Very good, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. Mark, Jesse, Paul, appreciate your comments today. And I think bottom line, folks, is that we've got a great opportunity that we've been able to really develop over the years, because Angus is pretty unique in that with the Certified Angus Beef program that's been around for so many years, since 1978, that's kept in the back of the mind of most producers that, hey, we are producing beef. There are cattle producers out there that just take them to town and load them off the truck, and they don't ever worry about those animals or what's happening to that product after that. CAB has changed that whole line of thinking, I think, for a lot of cattle producers, not just the purebred breeders, but folks like Jesse that are using Angus genetics. It's made a difference. And as a result, balancing the cow with that consumer is a little bit easier when you've got that end user in mind, and you've got a tangible way that you can see that. And I think that's one unique thing about this particular breed.
Such a dynamic conversation we had in Oklahoma City, and we're so excited to be able to share it with you this evening through this secondary platform. We do have our panelists here with us tonight in person. Jesse, Mark, Paul, thank you so much again for taking the time this evening to answer some questions about your conversation. Jesse, I'm going to start with you. You touched on this right at the end, and you're probably very unique. And we saw that the association recently released in their industry insight survey showing that the cow-calf operation, very few of those operators, producers actually see that carcass or feedlot data come back to them. How have you, specifically in your herd, seen that impact of having that extra data set of the end of the process to come back and circle to the beginning of the production cycle and make those changes and adapt based on what you're seeing at the end?
Well, the carcass data gives us something to look back on and focus on what EPDs that we're gonna target, those highly heritable EPDs that we're gonna target, or what management strategies we need to change in our operation to make those things even better. I just think that report card is a real telltale sign. And at that point, what you start doing is you start making decisions based on data instead of emotion. And we're really emotional. We're really connected to our operations in the cattle industry. But a lot of times when we make emotional decisions, those decisions lead us astray. We do the one-off thing instead of tracking data trends. And data trends is really what you're playing a long game at the end of the day. So you can't change things overnight. And there's certain things you can do to enhance that, but ultimately we're playing the long game. And so if we're making emotional decisions from year to year or calf crop to calf crop, we really don't understand where we're at unless we have that data coming back to us.
Absolutely. The emotional side is something that makes the cattle production industry so special, but you're right. Data certainly should play a factor in that decision. Paul, when you look at your side of things from CAB, how do you envision, and I'm putting you on the spot, bridging that gap so that data does get shared more evenly across the industry to benefit every aspect of our ecosystem?
Well, that's really been a time-tested question without a very good answer, Jessica, because having been involved in that procedure for over 20 years now, I can tell you that it hasn't really made lots of gains in terms of ranchers actually seeing data from their calf crop in terms of their carcass outcomes. Certainly, there are some that are committed, no doubt about that, in a good share. But at the same time, if we're actually talking about the percentage of calf producers that have ever seen that data on their calves, the number is very, very small. And that's simply a byproduct of the relationship that we have across these sectors, and the fact that the cow-calf producer is one sector away from that packer customer and the feed yards in between. And when we give up ownership of those calves, which is, of course, the most typical situation for cattlemen at the ranch and farm level, then we've got to try to work with and create partnership with the feed yards. If the calves are sold outright to the feed yard, then the incentive for the cattle feeder to pass that back becomes diminished when there's really no responsibility to do so. Now, some feed yards have sure had the willingness and do today to share that data, even if there's not a retained ownership arrangement or partnership arrangement. But I think you can see that it's just really not a natural data flow scenario with this with those sectors the way they're set up. But I think more cow-calf producers ought to make strides to pursue the data. It's easier said than done for sure, but those that have a deep desire to learn what kind of calves they are creating can certainly do so, whether it be finding out who bought their cattle and simply paying a visit to the feed yard to talk through that, or other creative answers are certainly potential. But I do think there are some other systems today, some large customers of feeder cattle today that are aligning themselves a bit more with the cow-calf producer and sharing some of that data too. So in that aspect, it's promising in some pockets.
It's a little bit of spreading the word of how beneficial it can be to motivate both sides to make that connection. I'm gathering what you said there.
As a cow-calf producer, I think there should be quite a little motivation, really, because we know we know the value differential between a superior pen of calves versus one that's inferior, and the dollar values that separate the two become greater and greater as these, particularly the carcass premiums, improve, but also, of course, that ever important feed efficiency and average daily gain in the feed yard. So as a marketing tool, I'm always big on marketing for cattlemen. I would want to have that in my back pocket as I put some calves out in front of some potential buyers.
Mark, in lieu of having that data on the back end, we rely heavily on EPD data to help us make those decisions. When you look at your EPD data, when you're looking at replacement heifers or a new bull for your herd, where are you balancing those numbers to find the give and take between growth and maternal and carcass traits?
I think that gets back to the individual operation, excuse me, in a lot of cases as to where they put that balance. And, Paul made some really good points whenever we were in Oklahoma City about drawing those lines and establishing, if we identify these 2 or 3 traits that we know are important, say we're a cow-calf operation that sells at weaning, then as we balance calving ease with weaning weight, we still take a glance and consider that marbling EPD, some of those things that are going to impact consumers a little farther down the road. But that's a great question. I wish I had a great black and white answer for it, but that, I think, gets back to that uniqueness of each operation's management and marketing program.
Absolutely. Turning back a little bit more to that in sector, interesting number increase in round and chuck, and carcass market versus live market effects on pounds versus producing. When you look at those two, Paul, how do you balance it?
Jessica, would you mind stating the question just a bit differently for me? I'm slow on the uptake once in a while.
No, that was on me. So the dollar increase that you presented in round and chuck in your presentation, carcass market versus live market, the effects on poundage when we're producing an animal. Is there a balance to that, or do you see that expounding infinitely?
Well, I think really the decision on the carcass versus live market is just one of being informed. And as I've been an interested party in this discussion for a number of years, I've found that it may seem just a little too obtuse to say that cattle that are any good at all will sure make money on a grid. But that's actually a statement that I do stand by, because our national average numbers for carcass traits, particularly as it relates to quality grade, they've grown and grown, but a decent set of cattle can easily surpass those. And I think the motivator should be for cow-calf folks to generate just even what they might perceive as slightly above average cattle. And I'm speaking specifically now to the Angus-based cow herd, which I think is natural for this discussion, Jessica. But if you think you're just maybe a little bit better than average, those cattle probably ought to be sold in a carcass market. And as well, I think that the format of our discounts on those value-based grids that packers offer, those have also, I think, made yield grade a little bit easier topic to handle than they did maybe 15 to 20 years ago, where the discounts were severe for a little extra back fat and a little extra carcass weight. Today, those packers are driven on quality. And we've seen that in the pattern that they have reduced the yield grade discounts in the 4 and 5 category. And I certainly don't say those are targets, but they've reduced those discounts while increasing the quality premiums. So I guess to try to summarize, I sure think we ought to progressively work toward a carcass-based market. Indeed.
And I'm bouncing off of a comment you made, Paul, at the end of your presentation, but this is a question for Jesse and Mark on here. We talk about, Paul, you mentioned nudging the average forward. And when you are raising cattle, I think we have a large goal ahead of us that we're always chasing. Does it mean that sometimes we forget the small milestones along the way that show, as in Paul's presentation, how much progress we've made as an industry as a whole when it comes to providing that product to the consumer?
Yes, Jessica, you want us to answer that for you? So I don't think we can forget where we came from and to where we are now in the last 20 to 30 years. Let's not, I think those are huge milestones and I think there's still a lot more growth to be made. I think there'll always be challenges along the way, and we'll learn from those challenges and move forward. But I think, as far as we keep raising the bar, and I think we have to raise the bar to create a product that's unique. And, the beef in the United States it's not the same beef that is sold around the world. And especially connected to the Angus breed, we're achieving a product that is on the higher end, and it's not just a commodity product anymore. And that's something that we couldn't say 20 or 30 years ago. So as we nudge forward, I think where we've come from in the last 20 years has been these small raises where we raise the bar slightly each and every year. And I think it turns into big changes later on. That's just my opinion.
I don't know that I've got much to add. Jesse did a nice job of addressing that. The nice thing about making genetic improvement, additive genetic merit is cumulative and permanent. And once we get those genes into the population, we continue to reap the dividends. And I think that as we look at something like that data that Paul shared in Oklahoma City, and again tonight, that we have built the additive genetic potential for marbling and carcass quality, and it has led to a consistent product. And I know I've said this before, but it is a great success story to tell, and you can look at it incrementally along the way, and just in where are you applying selection pressure and what are we accomplishing along the way. It is a really neat thing to look at, and it is something, it's a feel-good story in this business that we're all in.
Add one more thing to that. I think genomic enhanced EPDs and genomic testing of these cattle are going to make it an even more uniform product. I think that gives us that much more data to work from, and it's really fairly easy to obtain. And I think that's going to, I think we've already seen how that's going to help our industry. And I think we're, even though we're quite a ways into it, I think we're still in the infancy. I think there's going to be a lot to come out of that.
And on that positive note, we have reached our time limit this evening. Paul, Mark, Jesse, thank you so much for taking the time again here as well as in Oklahoma City to be a part of this discussion. We hope everyone joining us in Oklahoma City and here this evening gained a little insight and maybe sparked a few conversations that can be had as we head to the bull sale season and people are milling around the sale ring and sale barns, having those extra conversations about what's next and how do we continue to move the industry forward. So thank you all for spending your time here with us this evening. Now, If you want to go back and rewatch this presentation, or you'd like to share it with someone who you think will get some value out of it, we will be adding it to our YouTube page, Angus TV. That should be up shortly, and you will receive an email when it is up and available. Meanwhile, as we end things here tonight, it will directly send you to a survey where we hope you'll take the time to give us some feedback on tonight's presentation, as well as any suggestions for future topics Angus University should be covering about the cattle industry and the Angus breed specifically. Again, we appreciate everything you've done here as the panelists and the time that you've spent with us here this evening as an attendee. We hope to see you soon, and we'll keep you informed on our next webinar topics and dates.